So thank you very much for your waiting. Now we'd like to start the International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2024, SDGs and Disaster Resilient Society, to realize a sustainable society resilient to disasters. I am the master of ceremony for this program today, Nao Shimizu from the Hyogo Prefecture Government Public Relations. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Before the opening of the forum, we'd like to offer our silent prayers of mourning for the victims of the Noto Peninsula earthquake. So everybody, please rise. Let us pray. Thank you very much. Now please take a seat. Now, on behalf of the organizer today, we'd like to invite Mr. Makoto Iokibe, Chairperson Disaster Reduction Alliance and President of Hyogo Earthquake Memorial 21st Century Research Institute, to address to you. Now, Mr. Iokibe, microphone is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. After the silent prayer, I'm here. I cannot say congratulations, but would like to work with you this year as well. Natural disaster is hard, but international politics is another difficult theme. We want to support every aspect of that. So once again, thank you very much for joining today's International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2024. Thank you so much. Continuing to last year, we're holding this on-site as well. We have on-site audience. We also have bilingual distribution of this forum for more people to enjoy. So at the very beginning of the new year, it was very tough. I'm also related to Japanese government, so we made a greeting to the emperors, followed by other imperial families. And on behalf of everyone, I had to make a greeting and give a speech. The emperors are now 90 years old or above. Sorry, what I mean is the emperors who have already retired. In the world, Elizabeth is 95 years old, but in Japan, they are more than 90 years old. I want to understand how they support each other, even after getting old. I really love to see this former empress, and I hope that it will continue forever. That's what I said in the speech. I got to the Shinkansen bullet train. I came back to my hometown, and in the tunnel, the bullet train stopped. In Hokuriku region, there was an earthquake. The announcement said that we're stopping the bullet train because of the earthquake. So Tokaido bullet train had to stop when Hokuriku had an earthquake in a different region. And after 30 minutes or so, it started to run again. I was relieved. I was thinking maybe they will ask us to get out of the train, but it didn't happen. Anyways, looking at the history of disasters in Japan, we have a lot of disasters, but we also have active strata in Japan, and Nobi earthquake was magnitude 6.8, and in Kobe it was 7.4. And Nobi earthquake claimed the lives of 7,000 people, and in Kobe that was 6,400. And this time it's 7.6. So compared to Kobe and Nobi earthquakes, the moment and magnitude are not exactly the same thing to compare, but that's even greater than Hanshin Awaji earthquake, the one we had just a few weeks ago. So, in case of Chuetsu in 2004, Yamakoshi Mura village in the mountainous areas was very risky, and all the villagers were relocated to Nagaoka City using a helicopter. They relaxed for some while. They said they wanted to go back to the mountains, and they were allowed to go back to the mountains by having a safe housing there. It was still a small group of people, but this time the earthquake spread to wider areas. Suzushi and Wajima cities had different circumstances after the quake. So secondary evacuation is also taking place now. Some people go, some people don't go. So not everyone go to evacuate to a different area. Seems like this is one of the first experiences in our nation to experience things like that. So we're here at the DRA Forum, Disaster Reduction Alliance, or DRA, aims to mitigate the disasters through alliance. This is a byproduct of Hanshin Awaji earthquake of 1995. This is Port Island here. This is also one of the results of Kobe City's working. And HAT Kobe was created as a new hub for Kobe City. Intelligent International Hub was once established. So why? Well, as you know very well, the government of Hyogo at that time and people around them aimed not only to recover, but also to provide something meaningful for future generations. That was a creative reconstruction and recovery after the earthquake. The governor, Mr. Kaihara, wanted to create the 21st century civilization. Although we were at the hell of disasters, it's not the ultimate goal to just get back. We have to build back better. They're going to create the future of 21st century. We need to coexist with multicultural environment while ensuring safety and security. Well, that's his vision of creating the 21st century. So Mr. Kaihara and Hyogo Prefecture's vision were explained, and another person who is from Kobe City, who became the chairperson of recovery from the earthquakes. He wanted to create an international hub for intelligence. Washington, D.C. Mall gave him a hint. Smithsonian Institute had worldwide creative and intelligent persons that gather for research and development and other studies. Maybe we should have the same in Kobe City. That's the proposal from Mr. Shimo. And Mr. Kaihara, the governor, talked about the 21st century civilization. They are all combined to be DRA. Of course, DRI and Heart for Care Center in Hyogo Prefecture and other related organizations were established. It's not only about domestic affairs, but also the UN or Asia Disaster Resilience Center. are related, and that will be also later described. And Japan Red Cross is another organization, including WHO, which played an active role during COVID-19, and JICA, IGES, and other research institutions gathered. So they amounted 20 or so that comprise DRA. In order to show the outcome of our activities, we are gathering here today as DRA Forum. So that's why you are here and I'm here. In this forum today, it's really characteristic. We have a lot of female speakers. Disaster reduction may invite well-known professors, but we have a lot of female professors. Ms. Tamura, Ms. Sakamoto from Japan. They're the experts of disaster reduction. They're playing a very central role. We are now seeing a new era. Ms. Sakamoto will talk about the major earthquakes in relation to the international assistance, as well as the support for non-Japanese victims during earthquakes. She will talk about the past earthquakes and its analysis. This time, it's really characteristic that we will have Xiao Pei-chun, professor from Min Chuan University in Taiwan. I don't know if you know, but she studied under Morozaki professor in Kobe University, studied about disaster reduction before coming back to Taiwan. Taiwan also has a number of disasters. 4 years after 1995, they had a 9/1 earthquake. Triggered by that, they established Disaster Relief Act in Taiwan. There were giant typhoons or other climate crises. They're responding to new realities of disasters. Just like Japan, Taiwan is also working on disaster reduction and resilience, or DRR. I hope that she is going to give us the overview of what Taiwan has done. In the panel discussion in the latter half, we will have Ms. Tamura. And as I said, Ms. Kodama from ADRC, or Asian Disaster Reduction Center, who will talk about the Asian disasters and its overview. So Asian means not only Japan, but also Asian countries. So she studies on these. I said more than 20 organizations gather DRA. Based on her own research, she's going to present today. From the prefecture, we have Mr. Endo, who is a superintendent of emergency management in Hyogo Prefecture. When we think about future disasters or metropolitan earthquakes and Nankai Trough earthquakes, we need to be prepared. And what can we do? This presentation hopefully presents a foundation for that. Well, by the way, SDGs has 17 goals. We need to discuss about human, and of course, this discussion involves SDGs in some ways. While trying to achieve SDGs, let's think about the past and the present of disaster reduction. I hope to make this event a very meaningful event for you. Please stay with us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yokibe. Now, on behalf of the Hyogo Prefecture, we'd like to invite Vice Governor of Hyogo Prefecture, Mr. Yohei Hattori. I am the Vice Governor of Hyogo Prefecture, Hattori. Mr. Saito, the governor, has to come here to address to you, but due to his other public duty, he cannot make himself available. And I have his message with me, so let me read that message to you. I'd like to take this opportunity of this occasion of International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2024 to say a few words to you. First of all, I'd like to offer my deepest condolences to those who lost their lives in the Noto Peninsula earthquake, and my deepest sympathies go to those who were affected by the disaster. We wish for the reconstruction and recovery of the place. Immediately after the earthquake, Hyogo Prefecture has been providing human and material support to the affected areas. And we are also grateful to the various professional organizations based in Hatto, Kobe that are working to provide various types of support by utilizing their respective expertise. The situation in the disaster-affected area is still very severe, and long-term support is needed in accordance with the stages of recovery and reconstruction. We will continue to work together as an all-Hyogo organization, and we ask for your kind and continued support. And the other day, January 17th, marked the 29th anniversary of the Great Hanshin-Amaji earthquake. It is said that memories of disasters fade away after 30 years, so it is important to pass on experiences and lessons learned to the next generation. And Hyogo Prefecture has been working on a creative restoration born in the process of recovery from the Great Hanshin-Amaji earthquake, and the counterpart approach that was introduced for the first time in Japan as the Union of Kansai Government after the Great East Japan earthquake. And Hyogo Prefecture has accumulated a great deal of knowledge as an advanced prefecture in disaster prevention. And Hyogo Prefecture is also providing support to the city of Suzu in Ishikawa Prefecture by acting as a counterpart to the city. Last year, Hyogo Prefecture signed a memorandum of understanding on reconstruction assistance with 2 Ukrainian cities and states based on the principle of creative reconstruction, and has been providing support for reconstruction, including rehabilitation using prosthetic devices and mental health care, using Hyogo's knowledge and expertise. The next year will mark the 30th anniversary of the earthquake. We will look back on the progress of the recovery efforts to date and will continue to make constant efforts to realize a disaster-resistant and disaster-mitigating society. And we will continue to make the most of our efforts to support restoration and recovery efforts in Japan and overseas. Today's forum, under the theme of SDGs and Disaster Reduction Society, will focus on the realization of sustainable society in the face of the major disaster. The forum will discuss how to realize a sustainable society. We look forward to a lively exchange of opinions, and I hope that this forum will be a great success and will help to expand the circle of partnership among people involved in disaster prevention. I'd like to conclude my remarks by wishing the success of this forum and continued success and great health of all participants here today. January 13th, 2024, Governor Saito. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Originally, we were planning to have an address by Mr. Takeo Murakami, the Director, International Cooperation Division of the Cabinet Office, but in order to deal with the situation caused by the Noto Peninsula earthquake, he cannot make himself available today. Now, we'd like to have the keynote lecture. We'd like to invite Professor Mayumi Sakamoto, Graduate School of Disaster Governance and Resilience, University of Hyogo. Under the title of the Sustainable Disaster Management linked with multicultural daily life, we'd like to have the keynote speech. And as for the detailed profile of the speakers on the stage, due to the time restraint, please defer to the program. Now, Professor Sakamoto, the microphone is yours.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. I'm from University of Hyogo Graduate School. My name is Mayumi Sakamoto. And today, I would like to talk about sustainable disaster management linked with multicultural daily life. In our city, we have people from different countries, and we try to live with each other. How do we make it a sustainable disaster management life? Let's think about that. On the January 1st, Noto Peninsula earthquake happened, and the damage is huge. 232 people were killed, and around 16,000 people are still evacuating in shelters. It happened on the first day of the new year. And Ishikawa Prefecture is one of the most well-known sightseeing spots. From around the world, there's a lot of people going to Ishikawa. And many people were going back to Ishikawa Prefecture for New Year's holidays. And those people had to evacuate themselves due to the earthquake. This was not new. And the problem to this, not a new problem, has to be sought for. And disasters are everywhere. And Xinjiang, Uyghur had a major earthquake just this morning. In this region, external support is very difficult to be obtained. Similar situation can be seen in the Turkey earthquake last year. That was on the 6th of February. That started with the epicenter of Kahramanmaraş, with the southeast part of Turkey. This bordered with Syria. From 2010, Syria is in civil war. Within Turkey, more than 3.6 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. And most of them is around southeast. Out of the victims, more than 50,000 people from Turkey were victimized, and 6,600 out of them, out of 50,000, were Syrians. In Syria, 4,500 people or more have been victimized. Syria, bordering Turkey, has an intensified civil war especially. They have different forces against the central government. They have a lot of refugee camps. But the accessibility to the camps had to go through the Turkey's humanitarian aid routes. But due to the earthquake, this route was affected, and Syria did not get the full support. How do we really support Syrian people amid this situation? And how do we support the Syrian refugees in Turkey? That was a difficult question in this earthquake. In 1999, they also experienced another earthquake. Based on their experience, we also know that they need to be resilient against earthquakes. Regarding Turkey, rapid support was given, but the situation about Syria took a lot of time to grasp and understand in detail. However, this kind of issue is not confined to Turkey. In Japan, in 1999, Hanshin Awaji earthquakes occurred. 6,434 people were victimized, and 174 out of them were non-Japanese. When the earthquake occurred, foreigners in Hyogo prefectures were more than 97,000 people. Himeji in Hyogo used to accept Indochina Vietnamese refugees. So there were a lot of refugees from Vietnam. But at that time, information was not efficiently and effectively provided to such non-Japanese refugees, because it was the responsibility of each nation to protect people of living in different countries. But refugees are not included in that protection. When they cannot get the protection of their home country's government, they tend to get isolated. That is the issue that I will detail later. So, as we speak, globally, in different regions, there are people from different countries. It's a really multicultural daily life that we spend. Looking at SDG goal and the vision, it says, leaving no one behind. How do we realize all of these? How can we include Japanese and non-Japanese to leave no one behind? What is the challenge of supporting non-Japanese evacuees when major earthquake happens? It has a long history, and this is deeply related to Kobe City as well. This issue was first identified in 1923 when the Great Kanto earthquake occurred. From Tokyo, Kanagawa, Chiba, metropolitan areas were hugely damaged. It was magnitude 7.9. People who died and got missing was more than 100,000. This was the worst in Japanese history. Central government was hugely hit. Ministry of Finance and Communications, their buildings were destroyed, in addition to other agencies and government ministries. It was very difficult for the government to help the people. So they had to issue an abnormal decree so that people can evacuate on a wider scale. Out of the disaster-hit areas, Yokohama had a lot of non-Japanese residing inside. At that time, 6968 people were non-Japanese. Out of them, 4,800 were Chinese, 1,000 was Britain, and 662 were Americans. Embassies were located everywhere. 24 consulates and 2 diplomatic missions were in Yokohama. After the earthquake, Yokohama's damage was really serious. 1,789 people died. More than 1,000 people were missing. And diplomatic corps were hugely damaged. A British consulate general building was burned, and acting consul general who died, and the same basically happened to France as well, and the United States as well. In 1858, Japan-U.S. Treaty for Amity and Commerce was signed between Japan and the U.S. Non-Japanese started to settle in Japan for foreign settlement areas. First, Hakodate, Yokohama, and Nagasaki opened. Kobe was the 5th foreign settlement. From 1868, foreigners started to live in Kobe City. But Yokohama was the first. So diplomatic corps majorly were stationed in Yokohama. When we look at Kobe, it grew to this day, in a sense, due to Kanto Great Earthquake. When it happened, Kanagawa had the most number of non-Japanese, followed by Hyogo, Kobe, Tokyo, and Osaka. However, after this earthquake, Yokohama got a huge damage. Those non-Japanese in Yokohama started to evacuate to Kobe City. Foreign settlement in Kobe started to support those in Yokohama through different initiatives. And at that time, a wide area evacuation started nationwide. As I said before, in metropolitan areas, evacuation support was not easy. So on the 3rd of September, Japanese government requested people to return to their homeland. The Ministry of Railway tried to save not only the victims, but also people involved in supporting the earthquake damages by making it free to move around by trains and ships. A lot of people moved and evacuated, and first aid stations were located everywhere. regarding the foreign settlement in Kobe, got the news of the earthquake and were one of the quickest to support the disaster-stricken areas. On the morning of the 2nd of September, the diplomatic missions and corps discussed how to support Yokohama. On the 3rd and 3 p.m., they were at Kobe Regatta Athletic Club now. That was the gymnasium and theater at the time. They had a meeting to support a non-Japanese community. They started to support non-Japanese with an anonymous decision. U.S. registered ship West Orowa was a ship that loaded water and other emergency supplies that left for Yokohama. After it reached Yokohama, the Yokohama's victims were loaded. They got on the ship and came back to Kobe City. By the 4th of September, the evacuees started to arrive in Kobe City, and for 5 days since then, 15,000 people came to Kobe. This is still different from the official number of Japanese government. So unofficially, diplomatic corps worked together to rescue and make those victims evacuate in Kobe City. So the number should be more. In Kobe, they actually established a relief committee in Kobe City. The support countermeasure headquarters was established in Oriental Hotel. They created subcommittees for medical, medicine, finance, logistics, clothing, and disembarking or livelihood-related registrations. They created committees for that. They evacuated to Oriental Hotel most of the time, followed by Kobe Gymnasium Theater, Canadian Academy, English Mission Schools, and other schools accepted those evacuees. And at that time, it was right after the Russian Revolution. Russian refugees were many in number. Kobe City accepted those refugees from Russia as well. So non-Japanese community helped each other to support the victims of disasters. For Kobe City's community to support non-Japanese, it was in a sense the first time, but they worked very well with each other. They did not go back actually because they received support in Kobe, and Kobe became #1 foreign settlement in Japan, thanks to those people who did not decide to go back to Yokohama. And trade, import and export also was activated in Kobe, and Kobe port became one of the best in the world. After the Kanto Great Earthquake, people in Yokohama were accepted in Kobe City. We also supported supplies to Yokohama. In 1995, when the earthquake happened, the Yokohama City was the first to come to Kobe City to help. People from Yokohama who came to Kobe said, "We were helped by you, Kobe City, so I'm here to give back." So history has shown that people help each other. In this Kanto Great Earthquake, the world has given us a lot of support. From about 30 countries around the world, about 10 billion yen was donated to Japan and Kobe City, providing medical support and supplies. It's really impressive that, globally speaking, international cooperation for humanitarian relief was the first case in this earthquake 100 years ago. League of Nations, which is a precedent of United Nations, included Japan as a permanent member. So the Kanto earthquake happened at the 4th League of Nations General Assembly held in Geneva. And at that Geneva meeting, they discussed and deliberated on the support to Japan after the earthquake. It was one of the biggest topics in the agenda. But at that time, League of Nations has never supported after a disaster happened in a country. They have never made a formal decision before. So at the League of Nations, they were trying to recover from the World War I at that time. So the victims in the war were the main objective for support, not for the disasters. However, League of Nations decided to support Japan, and Japan was the permanent member at that time. They had a bigger cost-sharing ratio than other countries, and Japanese academic institutions were hugely hit. But universities could be reconstructed, but books should never be lost, because otherwise research cannot be conducted. So books were donated from all over the world to Japan. Those books are now kept in the library of Tokyo Imperial University. Japan and China had a difficult relationship at that time, but China also actively supported Japan. Considering this situation, Shibuya Eiichi also talked about the importance of humanitarian support based on the international mutual support. This is a very important thing for university students in Japan to learn and never forget. In the Hanshin-Awaji earthquake, Kobe was hugely hit based on this lesson. As I said before, in Kobe, there are a lot of non-Japanese living. Tokyo, Osaka, Aichi, Kanagawa, and next to that is Kobe. We had a lot of non-Japanese living. Korean, Chinese, Indians, Vietnamese, and Filipinos were the more in number. And regarding the Vietnamese, it was the second, followed by Kanagawa. But 70 years after Kanto great earthquakes, the foreign communities in Japan had a division of people who lived so long time and for short time. In Kobe University, they have released this research articles. They talked about how to support those non-Japanese people in communities. So Koreans, Chinese, Indians have the third or fourth generations in Kobe City as well. So they live for such a long time now. They have lands, they have houses, they have strong bonds with families and relatives and friends. They are still able to respond to disasters, but if it's really short time for them, if they're new, if they're not based in Japan, what happens? For example, Vietnamese came as refugees due to the war in their countries in the 1980s. At the time of the earthquake, it was just more than 10 years since they started living, so they had jobs, but they don't have any family base or community base in Japan. In 1990s, Japanese foreigners started to live in Japan. For example, Filipinos or Perus or Brazilians started to live in Japan as primary employment, but they're not based fully in Japan. We also had to respond to these different situations.
And Great Hanshin-Awaji earthquake caused damage to the many foreign homes. But unfortunately, not much support system was ready for them. And among the fallen victims, some of them evacuated the evacuation center together with the other Japanese. But between the Japanese evacuees and the fallen evacuees, sometimes occurred the troubles. And there were many Vietnamese, and they were the refugees, so they could not expect the support from their own country. And the relationship with the Japanese was not so good, so that evacuation centers for the Vietnamese refugees, or when the stealing happened, Japanese people suspected the Vietnamese people. So in that way, it became difficult for the Vietnamese people to stay at the evacuation center. So many of them left the evacuation center and moved to the tent village. At maximum 170 people lived in a tent village in Nagata board. And with the passage of time, the support for the foreign foreigners was regarded as very important and necessary. So first of all, Hyogo Prefectural Police started the activity to support the foreigners. So they established the consultation service for the foreigners in police office. And also on January 24th, Hyogo International Association established a special emergency consultation desk for foreign residents with a multilingual service. And also the local radio station started the multilingual broadcasting to deliver information to the foreign residents. And this support for the foreigners, the volunteer activities was very important for them, and also the religious institutions important. For example, the Catholic Church, Takatori Church, became a support center to provide support to the Vietnamese victims. So in this way, the community where the foreigners get together, the support was provided. But the system was not well established, so this is a point we have to look back. So after the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, in order to enhance the support system for the foreigners in case of emergency, the initiatives were taken throughout the nation. So, for example, the national government had the basic disaster management plan, with which the disabled people, aged people, and foreigners designated as the disaster vulnerable people, so that it is clearly stated they need special attention in case of an emergency. And also in Hyogo Prefecture, in regional disaster management plan, these foreigners and other people are stated to have the special support. And in the case of the emergency, information has to be shared with the foreigners. And also NHK started the sound multiplex broadcasting after the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. And in this way, the support system for the foreigners was developed. And let's look into what the system is now. Now, about more than 30 million foreign residents are in Japan, and there are various status for them. So there are 29 status for the foreign residents in Japan, and especially the so-called technical intern trainees are working in Japan while learning. There are so many of them in Japan. And how the support is provided to these people by the national government and regional government. They are the kind of silos organization. So for the residents, the crisis management department of each local government work with the international exchange division to deal with them. And basically, the international exchange division basically provides support for the foreign residents. And about the visitors or tourists, each municipality's tourism division deal with them. So the residents and visitors have to go to the different organization to be supported. This is the point I'd like you to pay attention to. And about the evacuation facility for the foreign travelers is established. For example, in case of Noto Peninsula earthquake, Kanazawa City was damaged, and the city hall of the Kanazawa has a system to provide the support to the foreign tourists. And this is a case of the Hokkaido Eastern Iburi earthquake, with which people had difficulty in dealing with a foreign tourist. And this earthquake took place on September 6th, and that is a high time for the tourists. So there were so many tourists visiting this area. But because of the earthquake, JR operation was stopped, and also the airport were closed. So the tourists on Hokkaido did not know where to go and what to do. And after the earthquake, in all area of the Sapporo city had the power blackout, and also the people staying at hotel were asked to come to the lobby, and only after checking the safety of the room they were allowed to return to their home. But the foreign tourists in the lobby did not know what to do, and some misunderstood that they were expelled from the room or hotel and searched for the other lodgings. And to support the foreign tourists, in case of emergency, Sapporo City has a very specific measures. So in case of emergency, they have the International Exchange Plaza to establish the multilingual support center. So in collaboration with the city of Sapporo, they provide such support. And for the foreign tourist, the tourism division was in charge of it, but in a way to provide support both for the resident and the tourist. This multilingual support center was established. So immediately after the disaster, within the Sapporo International Community Plaza, that multilingual support center was opened, but safety of that facility itself has to be checked. So they left this international plaza and have to move to the city hall to establish this support center again. And foreign tourists scattered or could be found in the Sapporo city, and they needed the support. So to accept these foreign tourists, the various facilities were opened for them. So some facilities were opened as an accommodation for the foreign tourists. So they were guided to these places. And after the earthquake, that transportation was blocked for about 3 days, and the power was not available for 3 days. So after the 3 days, the situation began to get back to normal, but it took much time and effort to bring the situation go back to normal. And in each evacuation center, they found many foreign tourists and foreign residents. And more than 10,000 people evacuated at that time, and more than 300 evacuation centers were established in the city. And many of them had accommodated the foreign residents. And not much is known about these foreign residents. And information dissemination to the foreigners during in the case of emergency is now well progressed now. So sometimes the information is given in English, but there are the foreigners who do not English. So the plain Japanese information dissemination is also done. But more action is needed to support especially the technical intern trainees. So in recent years, we have many heavy rain disasters, and many of them damaged these technical intern trainees. So when a disaster happens and their work ask them to evacuate, some of the interns reply that it's okay and do not evacuate, because resulting in a big damage. Because some of them do not have such disasters or earthquake in their home country at all. So they do not have any understanding about what the disaster is, or how to react, or where to evacuate in case of emergency. So even if the information about the evacuation is given to them, they do not know what to do with that information. So we have to have the system to have connection with these people. So we have to be. So many of the disaster prevention activities is to be prepared for the case of emergency, but we have to take these people, such as interns, technical training interns, in consideration when we think about how to connect normal times and emergency times. And one of them is to have the training or learning session about the disaster, including the foreign residents. For example, in case of the Takasago City in Hyogo Prefecture, they have the local disaster drill, including the foreign residents. So Japanese people and foreign people have the communication and learn together about the disaster. And they bring their own emergency bag, and they can compare the contents to find what difference exists. And they found the big difference. In the case of the Philippines, they have the flashlight, energy bar, a kind of nutritious bar only in their emergency bag. And compared to that, the Japanese people have the various kinds of stuff in their emergency bag. So they could tell the difference of the culture through this experience, which is very interesting. And now in Japan, the regional district disaster prevention plan is being developed. So that is the specific plan, matches the specific situation of each region or area. So in case of the Furubira town in Hokkaido, they have the district disaster prevention plan of their own. And this damage is expected to be inflicted by a tsunami caused by an earthquake with an epicenter off the coast of Rumoi, Hokkaido. And this is the area where the seafood processing factories, and there worked many people, including the foreign workers. So how to support these people, how to evacuate these people are planned in this district disaster prevention plan. And actually, about 16 technical trainees are included. And when they have the many, so town has a kind of workshop for the interns who have been working in Japan for quite a long time, and they have the discussion. And through these interns with many years in Japan, the information will be delivered to the new members. And when we actually see how the workshop is done, when they hear the alarm against the earthquake, they go under the table and confirm the safety, and after that they go evacuate to the higher places. So if this system is well established, the local community and the trainer interns are well communicated by so-called communicators. So in this case, the technical interns who have been working in Japan quite a long time served as a communicator, and also the president of the company for which the trainees work for serves as a communicator. So through these people, the information are delivered to the other technical trainees. So in this way, for the foreign residents, on a daily basis, the opportunity were given to learn about the disaster or disaster prevention activities. And through the accumulation of such activities, rather than providing the multilingual services, in case of emergency, people can work and act together. So the normal time and emergency. So I'd like to call this connection between these two as a phase-free. So we'd like to achieve the phase-free disaster prevention, especially in the multicultural situation. So the communicator, which serves a kind of bridge between the local community and the foreign resident or foreigners, is very important. And to connect the various communities has to be made into one network. So in case of the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake in Nankin-machi in Hyogo Prefecture, people had the catering for the evacuated people. And the people moved very quickly because in daily lives they got together once a week to prepare for the Chinese New Year. So they already have the kind of well-established communication among the local residents. So they have the well-established communication, and that will be a kind of good preparedness against the disaster. But we have to see and ask ourselves whether we have such communication established with the foreign residents or foreign tourists in Japan or not. And we can have such communication network that will serve better for the disaster prevention from now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sakamoto. Now, we'd like to have a special lecture from Taiwan, Min Chuan University, Department of Urban Planning and Disaster Management, Professor Xiao Pei-Chen. She will talk about the progress of DRR systems in the 25 years since the Taiwan 9/21 earthquake. The floor is yours. I would like to offer my deepest condolence to those victims of Noto Peninsula earthquake. From the bottom of our heart, we hope that the disaster-hit areas will recover as quickly as possible. I'm from Min Chuan University. My name is Xiao Pei-Chen. I'm really honored to be here, and I can learn a lot of things today. Thank you so much for the organizers who offered me this opportunity today. I want to share with you this theme titled Progress of DRR Systems in the 25 years since the Taiwan 9/21 earthquake. If you look at this slide here, this is Taipei City 101 building. Just below here, there is an active stratum in the metropolitan area. So this also shows that there is a challenge we have to overcome. Okay, thank you. This is the overview. I will talk about the overview of the earthquake, and after the earthquake, what kind of DRR structure was made, and what are the future challenges. We'll talk about these today. If you look at this slide, you know that based on World Bank report, only 5% of countries have more than triple disasters, and Taiwan is one of those 5 nations. In our nation, there are 3 or more disasters. More than 70% of the people in Taiwan have experienced 3 or more natural disasters. So Taiwan has a higher potential of disasters than other nations. If you look at this, these are frequent natural disasters in Taiwan. The first one is 921 earthquake, I will describe later. Number 2 is in 2001, that's Nari typhoon. Taipei City and subway platforms were inundated with water. In 2009, that was Morocco typhoon. It was a huge flooding. Houses were collapsed. So climate change is impacting us. The 4th picture is just last year. It was a drought. Usually in the Sun Moon Lake, this is not the situation as you see in the picture, but once the situation changes, you have to experience drought. So these are the 4 different types of natural disasters, and I want to focus on one of them, which is 921 earthquake. 1999, September 21st, and that was 1:47 in the midnight, magnitude 7.3. That was the earthquake. And at that time, I was the doctoral student, the first-year student. And in Taiwan, I was joining a symposium in Taiwan because so I came back from Kobe to Taiwan. I thought about whether I should go back. My professor told me to go back to Taiwan because it's an emergency. 1 week later, I went to Taiwan with my professor. The victims will be about 15,000 people, including those who died, and 85,000 houses were collapsed. Economic loss is almost 1 trillion or so. If you look at this graph, there are active stratum shown in Taiwan's map. In the middle, this is the major areas hit by the earthquake. They are the active faults. There are group houses in Taipei City that also collapsed. Some stations were also collapsed. School grounds or mountain areas also had mudslides or landslides. After an earthquake like this, Hyogo Prefecture, there were 1,000 temporary houses provided. During reconstruction, Kobe City Housing Bureau and many executives from Kobe City came to Taiwan for relief activities. And researchers came to Taiwan by sharing knowledge of disaster reconstruction from Japan's lessons. We learned a lot. And paper dome relocation was also discussed and executed. after this earthquake, Japan supported us a lot. So I want to express my sincere appreciation to people in Japan. That was a serious damage in Taiwan, but we learned a lot from Japan. Even in Taiwan, emergency response and reconstruction needs to be structured. I became really serious about this. So this earthquake in Taiwan meant that it was a trigger for creating a structure for disaster relief. Next, I want to talk about the beginning of disaster relief and reduction structure. Before the earthquake, disaster relief means it was a government-led monetary support. They just give you the money for condolences. It was the case for 50 years or so. There was a Northridge earthquake in 1984. In the same year, China Airlines in Nagoya Airport had an accident. They showed us that the national government had to be serious about making quick actions. And in 1995, Hanshin Awashi earthquake happened, and in March, the government established the Ministry of Firefighting. They are actually the disaster reduction department of the Taiwan government. They created a bill, but national government responsibility was the main responsibility, and municipalities do not have much capability to respond after disasters. In 1997, National Disaster Relief or Technology Center also was established, and research should also be deeply involved in disaster relief. That was the idea established. Taiwan University, Chin University, and others said that disaster reduction requires inviting Japanese researchers so that Taiwan can learn from Japan. From Kobe University, Professor Morose, and Tsukuba University, Mr. Kumagai, and Tokyo Metropolitan University's professor got together, and they came to Taiwan. Right before the earthquake happened, there was a lot of discussion, and right after the earthquake, Disaster Relief Act was applied. So, disaster relief structure was fully established. So, Executive Yuan is placed as Central Disaster Reduction Committee, responsible for Taiwan's disaster reduction countermeasures. And 3-grade disaster response system was also established, and National Disaster Relief Technology Center was also established at that time. With this, disaster reduction-related science and research are now more collaborated than ever. And this act had 8 chapters and 52 articles. Even after that, Morakot typhoon happened in 2009. This also applied the act. And in 2016, February 6th, Mino earthquake happened. This act was applied to enhance the relief activities. Regarding the climate change treaty in 2022, we also applied the reinforcement of disaster relief awareness of nations and nationals. So the government has the Disaster Relief Committee, and the committee creates the basic plan for disaster reduction. On a municipality level, they have disaster reduction meetings, and municipalities creates a regional basic plan that's also discussed and executed. And at the time of disasters, headquarters will be opened based on different responsibilities stipulated in the basic plan. They take actions. So, as I said before, disaster reduction structure is very important, and nationwide, this was established, but municipality-wise, the basic plan establishment was difficult for those municipalities. In 2003, December, the National Disaster Reduction Center worked with Taipei City and Kagi City. They created a pilot plan so that the municipalities can reinforce their governance on disaster reduction. Based on this experience, they created manuals. In 2009, they started a 5-year plan. So governmental disaster reduction plans, scenario-based disaster reduction, hazard map creations, database integration were the focus points. From 2017, we got into a different phase. Government had to really reinforce the civil disaster resilience as well. Disaster reduction was necessary for citizens as well. So that was the third phase of the 5-year plan. They focused on civil capabilities for disaster reduction. Resilient community and disaster reduction experts were the focus points during this era. It also included corporate-based disaster reduction activities. The fourth phase is ongoing. We're trying to support and enhance the wide area support by the government. We also have to make resilient countries and its national security during this phase. Okay. All these municipalities are working with local universities, as you can see here. During the pilot phase, as many universities as possible were supposed to contribute to society by working on disaster reduction. Looking at this Taiwanese map, you see local universities and surrounding municipalities. And Minchuan University is located in these islands, as you can see. We also support the prefecture or province in the eastern north. During emergency, disaster reduction governance has to be enhanced. In case of disaster, countermeasure headquarters has to be opened so that researchers can get to the headquarters for a better support. So continuously, civil-based disaster reduction capability is connected to town building or city building based on disaster reduction. After the earthquake, things already happened, but the Ministry of Interior made a civil power operation plan. So mainly it was about the firefighting rescue teams. After 9/21 earthquake, we tried to make the best use of the lessons learned from Hanshin Awaji earthquake. The community of disaster reduction and welfare was demonstrated. Taiwan learned and tried to do the same. Looking at the disaster-stricken areas, there was a typhoon on the following year. There were landslides and mudslides. Those residents had to evacuate. So we recommended drills. 11 locations of high landslide risks were included as the city building programs. So Reconstruction Committee got a budget so that Taiwan University's Chin professors team could go to the disaster-stricken areas and work on a pilot project for making a disaster reduction-based cities. That resulted in creating a manual. From 2006, areas not hit by disasters started to implement pilot plans. Tainan, cities, and communities there were the targets, and university, including Chuanjun Christian University, was included in the 3-year plan. Of course, after the Morakot typhoon, houses were collapsed, and we also needed to build a city that's resilient against flooding. We needed to build cities that's strong against flooding, landslides. To make cities resilient against disaster reductions, that needed to be conducted by making the best use of Morakot typhoon. So, in more recent years, Resilience Committee was a focus, and this continues to this day. Morakot typhoon's lesson has to be learned and reflected. As I said before, these are the maps with landslide risks. We created evacuation maps like this. Areas in yellow and red are both having higher risk for landslides. In case of yellow, that's a recommendation to evacuate. In red areas, that's the order to evacuate. So, out of those, lines in purple or pink are the evacuation route, and evacuation sites are also indicated in the map. If you see this, if the government works with experts and researchers, they can create maps like this. But discussing with residents were not taking place before making this map. So it's very important to really learn the lessons. Since then, to work and prevent landslides, the professors, researchers started to talk more with residents before making evacuation maps. Conducting evacuation drills were also recommended. So in order to discuss, community is very important. We selected communities, and then we discussed how to implement those programs, and disaster reduction related knowledge had to be drilled.
So from the manual, we created the process, and as a result, the disaster prevention organization was established. And based on such organization, evacuation drills was also conducted. And this is a full promotion period, so the town building against the water hazard. So in case of disaster, this will be realigned into the water disaster prevention organization. And also the disaster prevention map was established, and also it was also delivered what is necessary in the evacuation bag, and so it can be used for the actual evacuation. And the disaster prevention organization role is now being checked. So based on such result, the district or regional disaster prevention plan was established. And establishing that regional plan, based on the experience or lesson of the community, what can be mitigated, to what extent, and how to protect those vulnerable to disasters was taken into consideration to come up with a specific disaster prevention measures or evacuation measures. So taking the expected disaster into communication, the organization established to have the sustainable operation of the community. And we have to deal with the climate change too. So 9/11 earthquake is a kind of trigger for us to work on the disaster prevention, and Sumonakoto Typhoon is the one to deal with the climate change. So from the national government, the measures against the climate change was asked to be established, and also the National Disaster Prevention Committee asked for the establishment of the resilient society and community, and National Science and Technology Committee asking for the strong Taiwan as a national project. And last year, the ministry and agency to deal with climate change was established. And also the indicator or guideline were also established. And together with the private companies and the private communities, there was a promotion of the town creation strong against the water hazard and the climate change. And this is a proposal by the administrative office. So that is 10 important elements of the UN RDD, and this is the 8 elements important for Taiwan. So the resilience of society and the risk has to be comprehended, and the economic resilience and infrastructure resilience, and also the preparedness against the reconstruction are important. And these are 8 elements. And this is about the national project, and in major 3 areas. So first, through the observation, the basics of the climate change will be comprehended. And action plan, according to action plan, the materials, knowledge, and the technologies will be provided. In the third area, the connection with society or continuous connection with society will be provided to continue to provide the information. And the third part is related to this local government. And this is what I mentioned a moment ago. So this is the evaluation guidelines for the flood resilient cities by the local government in a major 4 areas. So the resilience of local government is evaluated to come up with improvement measures. And in regional level, they have establishing the regional level disaster prevention plan. And one example is the promoting of the flood resilient community. So this is a bit different from the conventional way of resilient community. So these 7 stages are placed importance. So in a normal time, these residents will be well prepared against a disaster. So in case of the emergency, after the emergency, they will learn from the experience and reflect them in the new plan. So they will revise the plan again, so they can go through the regular exercise or drills. So challenges from now, we have to talk about the major earthquake and extreme weather. So after the 9/11 earthquake, the lesson and memory will have faded, and the measures by the national government against the disaster, and the purpose of which is not actively understood. But from now, we have to come up with a proper method to comprehend the disaster damage so that we can apply them for the better measure against the disaster. And that is a place we are going to make the further effort, where we have to make the effort. And the national government, disaster prevention division, and other divisions have to have the kind of connectivity or integration in coming up with a measure against the national disaster. And local governments. So as they have to set their goals of the disaster mitigation, and they have to understand their current situation and come up with the better understanding how they can strengthen their measures. So they have to continue to revise their disaster prevention measures and also have to develop their human resources to deal with a disaster. And the regional disaster prevention organization have to think about how to enhance their resilience. So this is about the fourth to seventh elements. So these are the elements we have to place importance on from now on in our organization. So this is one other point we have to think. And lastly, now Taiwan has an aging society too. So the extreme weather or climate change has to take the measures for the sustainable society. That's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. So Professor Shao, thank you very much for your special lecture.
Now we're going to start the panel discussion titled SDGs and a Disaster Resilient Society. First of all, I would like to introduce the facilitator from Niigata University, Professor Risk Management Center, Ms. Keiko Tamura. Thank you. We will introduce the panelists. From the right, from University of Hyogo Graduate School of Disaster Governance and Resilience, Professor Mayumi Sakamoto. Next, from Minchuan University, Department of Urban Planning and Disaster Management, Professor Xiao Pei-chun. Next, from Asian Disaster Reduction Center, Director, Research Department, Miki Konama. Superintendent of Emergency Management and CEO, Mr. Endo Eiji. Next, Chairperson, Executive Committee of International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum and DRA, Mr. Yoshiaki Kawata. They are the panelists. Their profiles can be referred to in the pamphlet. Now, let's start. Ms. Tamura is going to facilitate. Hello, everyone. I know you have been listening to us. Thank you. It's very interesting, I guess. Today's title is the SDGs and a Disaster Resilient Society. We had the Noto Peninsular earthquake. This also shows the importance of sustainable development in the disaster-stricken areas. That's now damaged now. We have to overcome this problem to realize disaster-resilient society. This is just another reminder for us. Let's think about SDGs and a disaster-resilient society together with all of you. So first of all, I would like to give you a brief introduction or presentation. As you know, this is the SDGs. These are Sustainable Development Goals. We have to sustainably develop our society. And what are the targets or goals we need to achieve? In order to be resilient, we need to protect people's lives, and they're essential to our societies. To be resilient, people globally have to collaborate, but in what way? SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, could give us a hint. It covers not only natural disasters, conflicts, terrorism, or disordered development. they have to be enhanced. They cover everything so that people can have a common target. It is organized in a very easy to understand ways. In natural disasters, the regions and countries could be destroyed. We need to understand that they could really destroy the world. They could really destroy the fate of a nation. When we say systemic risk, what is this? In 2015, SDGs came out. This includes systemic risk and Sendai Disaster Reduction Framework and Paris Agreement that tries to address both disaster reduction and climate risk or climate change. They developed international agenda so that we can work towards a sustainable future that's positioned by the UN and joined by Japan. Especially in natural disaster area, $1 trillion disaster has been discussed. They could be disastrous. For example, Nankai Trough earthquake could have a gigantic earthquake, and that could cost us 220 trillion yen or 95 trillion yen in case of metropolitan earthquake. In total, that could be 300 trillion yen damage to our economy. This can also affect the nation's capability and the global capability as well. This could also affect greatly the SDGs. So in Japan, what are the focus points? We had covered Kanto Great Earthquake, and in West Japan, Nankai Trough earthquake could happen. This is put in a chronological order like this. In Kanto, metropolitan earthquakes and subduction zone-based earthquakes have happened repeatedly in Kanto areas around Tokyo. Last year was the 100th anniversary year from the Kanto Great Earthquake of 1923. In West Japan, there are subduction zone earthquakes with tsunami. The history have repeated itself. As you know, during the span of 100 to 200 years span, Japan has been hit by earthquakes like these. We need to consider the earthquakes that have happened before. And how do we get prepared for those major earthquakes? On the left-hand side, this is about disaster risk reduction or survival risk, or to mitigate destructive disasters. This is basically hardware-based countermeasures. This is a mitigation plan. But when it becomes a disastrous disaster, the damage could be even more wide-ranging. This is very uncertain. So on the right-hand side, we say that we have to live with those uncertainties. Software-based countermeasures is important. And on the other hand, we have to manage the risk of disasters. How do we live in Japan? How do we live in the world where there is a risk of disasters? We need to think about it in more comprehensible manner. As Mr. Shao mentioned before, it needs to be a Build Back Better scheme. And how do we realize all of that? We need to comprehensively cover all that to really achieve the disaster-resilient society. This is the English version, by the way. So from these two aspects, where do we need to go to? We recently talked more about definition of resilience or resilient society. It's defined as the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, adapt to, transform, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions through risk management. That's the definition here, defined by the UN. So if we try to resist or absorb, accommodate in others, what does it really mean? You can see the diagram here. Resilience have 3 types. On the left is to go back to the original state. This is for small-scale disasters. This is about recovery. You can go back and recover quickly. But in case of major earthquakes, you go to the middle graph. You go down, but you go back, after all, to the original state. But when it's a disastrous or catastrophic disaster, getting back to the original state is almost impossible, I think. What we need to have is a transformative adaptation or a capacity. That's what I think we need to do. So disasters are bad, but it's in a sense an opportunity to build back better. Do we fail or succeed in disaster management and transform the risk into an opportunity? So we need to aim for the transformative capacity on the right. This is coming from the Science Council of Japan as their proposal. So if we can go back to SDGs, how do we collaborate with each other? Disaster reduction, climate change, and SDGs. How do we work together more comprehensively? We need to integrate knowledge from each different discipline. Your knowledge, your discipline can be integrated so that we can prepare better for those disasters. So disaster reduction, SDGs, environment, climate change, and relevant organizations have to collaborate on a regular basis by seeking understanding of civilians so that as a whole we can actually achieve the disaster resilient society. I think this is the first presentation I wanted to mention as we start off the panel discussion. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So far we heard from Professor Sakamoto and Professor Sho, and I had the time for myself. And from now, we'd like to hear about the international cooperation on DRR in Asia from Ms. Miki Kodama from the Research Department of Asian Disaster Reduction Center. So now, Ms. Kodama, microphone is yours. Thank you very much for your introduction. I am Kodama from the Asia Disaster Reduction Center, EDRC. And as was introduced, I would like to talk about under the theme of the international cooperation on DRR in Asia. So first of all, I'd like to express my condolence and sympathy to the victims of the Noto Peninsula earthquake. And as so we ADRC have received many inquiries about this earthquake, and at the beginning there was not much information available in English. So we translated the information into English and disseminated the information in English. In this way, from the international entities, we received many inquiries, and we found that many people and organizations around the world trying to provide the support. So let us start. So first of all, let me show you this slide. This is about the damage caused by the cyclone, which occurred in East Pakistan in 1970 or current Bangladesh. The cyclone moved along the coastal area and caused great damage, killing more than 300,000 people and damaged many facilities and buildings. Due to the delay of the disaster relief activities by the national government, the Bangladesh Liberation War took place. So this raised the level of understanding about the importance of the disaster management. And as a result, United Nations designated 1990s as a decade of international disaster prevention. So rather than dealing with a disaster which took place already, the promotion of activities toward the preparedness against disaster was advocated. And in the middle of this decade of international disaster prevention by United Nations in 1990s. In 1994, the first World Conference on Natural Disaster Reduction was held in Yokohama. And from Yokohama conference, they were proposed the regional establishment of the regional centers. And in next year, in 1995, Great Hanshin-Awaji earthquake took place, and they raised another level of interest in the disaster prevention activities in Asian countries. And Hyogo Prefecture came up with a proposal to disseminate what they learned, what experience to the world, and also to Japan. And with this as a background, Asia Disaster Reduction Center, for which I work for, was established at Hatto Kobe in Kobe City. And ADRC has now 32 countries from Asia-Pacific region as members. And the activities we carry out include the sharing of information about disaster prevention, development of human resource, and improvement of the disaster prevention capability of communities. So through the collaboration with various entities, we provide these activities. And the number of the member country was 22 at the beginning, but it gradually increased, reflecting the greater interest in the disaster prevention activities among the Asian countries. And as one of the major activities related to information sharing by the ADRC, we have the annual Asian Conference on Disaster Reduction. And this slide shows you the conference held in Tajikistan this year. And so far, the various member countries hosted this event to promote the activities of disaster prevention in each country. Now, let me show you another slide. This is the damage caused by the cyclone in Bangladesh in 2007, which killed also many people, caused grave damage. But this cyclone was different from that of Bola, although the severity was the same. But when we compare the number of death toll, there were big difference. And how, in this case, that the number of death toll could be reduced? So after the cyclone in 1970, the construction of the cyclone shelter was promoted, and also the enlightenment program for the community was promoted. So as you see here, the very robust buildings were built, and the early warning information was given to the community to ask people to evacuate as soon as possible, and as a result, that the damage could be contained. And please take a look at this slide. This is another cyclone in Myanmar, half a year after the one in Bangladesh. So usually the cyclone moved along to the direction of Bangladesh, but in this case it moved to the east and attacked the coastal areas of Myanmar. While the preparedness could be seen in Bangladesh, Myanmar haven't experienced much cyclone, and it is first time in 40 years. So there was no system to provide early warning to residents, and also the preparedness against cyclone was not well established. That's why the damage was big in this region. And this is the damage caused by the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. So the epicenter was in the west-north edge of Indonesia with magnitude 9.3. And due to this huge earthquake, various critical damage took place in many countries along the Indian Ocean. And after this disaster, we conducted the survey to know about the residents' awareness, and we found there are some countries where not many people knew about tsunami, and because of the absence of that knowledge about tsunami, some people were victimized for catching fish after the disaster in ebb tide or did not evacuate. But in case of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, some cases could be seen that with a good understanding about tsunami, the evacuation could be made. For example, in one island near the epicenter of Indonesia, based on experience of another earthquake in 1907, they had a kind of a poem delivered from the next generation to generation to let people evacuate as soon as possible after the earthquake, so they could evacuate. And another case is the resort area in Thailand. One elementary school student ran about the tsunami before the vacation and led the evacuation activities. So these are the good cases. And however, there are many other cases that without the knowledge about the disaster, damage could not be avoided in Asian countries. For example, in 2013, Typhoon Haiyan hit Philippines, and absence of knowledge about the storm surge caused the greater damage. And in case of this typhoon Haiyan, the Philippine government observed and expected a big typhoon hitting the country, so it shared information with the residents. And I myself was staying at the capital of Philippines and received many early warning information and news. And so there was a news that this coming typhoon is huge and different from the usual ones. But the information has been delivered. However, there was no information about the storm surge, so many people expected that coming typhoon would be a little bit stronger than the usual one, and did not pay special attention to that for evacuation. And in case of the Goluka earthquake in Nepal in 2015, many buildings toppled and caused damages. In Nepal, among the specialists of disaster prevention, there was a concern about the big-scale earthquake and the necessity of the anti-seismic measure of the buildings. But many of the buildings remain as vulnerable to the earthquake, and the general public added the upper floors without thinking about the seismic measures. And last year in Turkey, there occurred another earthquake, and many of the reinforced concrete buildings toppled. And the major cause of that damage is the construction which was made without paying much attention to the earthquake and also without conforming to the seismic standard. So in this way, it is important for the people to know about the risk in their own community and raise awareness about their own activities against the disaster. But the promotion of such activity is not easy. So one of the activities we have been promoting is to provide opportunity of the disaster prevention town watching, so that people can have the opportunity to think about their own risk in their own town. In the third UN conference on the natural disaster reduction, the Sendai framework for DRA was adopted, and in which the disaster prevention activities involving the whole society is advocated. So to involve the whole society means to leave no one behind. This is what we have discussed. And it is important to involve young generation. And also, it is important to involve disaster prevention activities in our daily lives. And it is necessary to make up a system to continue that activity. So, based on this, it is now acknowledged important to involve the disaster prevention as part of the school education. And there are many countries which are trying to involve disaster prevention in the school education. And there are many other issues to work on in the school education, such as global environmental issues. So sometimes disaster prevention is not the center of the focus. And sometimes the disaster prevention education given at the school is just an evacuation drill only in many countries. So how to develop the human being in a way that it can act properly in case of emergency has to be studied as a part of the education. So at the ADRC, with a grant by the Hyogo Prefecture government, conducted a survey to comprehend the actual situation of the disaster prevention education in Turkey and what kind of needs exist there. So by collaborating with the affected areas, we would like to come up with a proposal about how to promote disaster prevention education at schools. So with these in mind, we are going to promote the disaster prevention activities in various Asian countries. That's all from me about the international cooperation on DRR in Asia. Thank you very much, Ms. Kodama.
Even in Asia, many things are happening. And due to that, awareness raising is also taking place in many places. Thank you. So from paneler, we want to have another person speak. From Hyogo Prefecture, Superintendent of Emergency Management, Mr. Endo is going to talk about the disaster reduction. Yes. During these earthquakes, I would like to offer my deepest condolence to those victimized. So from the Hanshin Awashi earthquake, it's been 29 years now. from domestic and abroad. We got a lot of support, and we want to just support everyone by working with Kobe City and Hyogo Prefecture, including private sectors. We want to work as all Hyogo to provide a long-term support. We also want to ensure the creative recovery and reconstruction, as mentioned already. So today, we want to talk about this structure of disaster reduction. So in Hyogo Prefecture, there was an earthquake in northern part, and its tsunami warning was actually 40 centimeters, which was already earlier expected to be 3 meters high. We collected information beforehand and asked people to evacuate if necessary. Only 2 people got injured as a result, but Ishikawa Prefecture was more severely hit. So Kansai Wider Area Federation got together online on the first workday to support as a counterpart system. Washima City was supported by Osaka Prefecture, Osaka City, and Sakai City. And Kyoto Prefecture and Kyoto City had a counterpart for another city hit in Ishikawa Prefecture. You can see the policy of support. We want to stay close to the on-site areas, and some other policies are included. And Peninsula is a less accessible area, and there are 2 other negative elements. So more than 200 people died, and Suzu City, 99 people died. Other relevant deaths may follow as well. From January onward, humanitarian support and physical support and emergency response and equipment support have been underway since the earthquake happened. Regarding dispatchment of staff, this data is actually updated every week, so this is just as of last week. Tomorrow, we will have the updated number. So this is as of last week. In total, 500 people are dispatched. There are fire brigades that are coming second or third time, so in total, it should be around 1,000 people going there. These are the actual activities on site. Supplies and needs collection activities, as well as support for opening schools. And Earth team meeting is also held. In Ishikawa Prefecture, schools were reopened, as media told us. These are the good supplies. Food was in short, and blankets were in short, people said. So we heard from those people in Ishikawa Prefecture. And nationally and prefecture-wise, we have summarized information like this before dispatching things. Now the needs or demand is subsiding. And the fire brigade were dispatched, and toilet was another issue. So Minami Awaji City sent flashing type toilets that are sent, highly appreciated by the people. From Yabu City, coin laundry car for laundry purpose is also being dispatched to the disaster-stricken area. From on-site, we also support them by providing temporary houses. We're also accepting people. Inquiries are coming. We have not accepted fully yet, but we want to meet their needs going forward. And we also accept monetary contribution from everyone so that we can help support Ishikawa Prefecture. 27 million yen so far, but it's now almost close to 50 million yen compared to 27 last week. We appreciate your support. What are the challenges now? Well, the first aid support and school reopening and roads reconstruction require understanding information on site. So we have to dispatch the quick team to understand. We also have to understand the degree of damage at houses. There are 12 people to appraise the damage. We're going to dispatch another team this week. So there are different support teams from different disciplines. volunteer activities will be more activated. The roads are broken, houses are not available, so general volunteers are not accepted yet. Only the specialized volunteers are accepted. So there will be more social education activities that will go more. And there are 2 people from Hyogo Prefecture that are going to Ishikawa as volunteers on a specialized basis. So depending on phases, we want to make the best use of the lessons learned from 117. And as I said before, we are all Hyogo, one team, to support Ishikawa. The building have to be stronger. Information has to be shared. People are aging. They cannot use smartphones well. So how do we offer information to them? People are isolated. In villages, it's very difficult to provide supplies. How do we connect them to hospitals when they're isolated? We have to think about all of these. Hyogo Prefecture has to make a better response, of course. So such improvement has to be fed back to Hyogo Prefecture. That's all from me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Endo. Please give him a big hand. So governmental officials are now on site to help, and I think that also completes the ring of support. Ishikawa Prefecture is largely affected by tsunami, and many people's lives are at stake, as you can also hear from these speakers. I live in Niigata Prefecture now. In 1964, there was a major earthquake, and there is an urban liquefaction happening, and more than 8,000 people have been victimized. They needed the relief or disaster damage certification. Toyama Prefecture, on the northwest areas, the damage is deeper. So just like Ishikawa, people were crawling out of their houses. In Toyama Prefecture as well, they also suffer from liquefaction problems. So these areas have to move forward based on the lessons from the past. And there are many supports coming from in and outside. So I also hope that you can also do the same in your own way possible. Mr. Endo, thank you so much. Now, the 5th paneler, Mr. Kawara, what's your comment or feedback? If you have any philosophy of your own, please let me know. Well, I have many things to say, but in DRI, Disaster Reduction and Institution, on the 2nd of January, we said to the Ishikawa governor, there are 3 people stationed fully to support Noto area, Noto city. So I think the government of Ishikawa is making a very good response. However, roads are badly damaged. It's very difficult to get on site. That's a physical problem that's identified more than before. So on site, people who wanted to support cannot get accommodation. So they had sleeping bags instead to spend the night. They don't have bathroom, of course, so they cannot take a bath. Starting from the government, the utmost level of support is underway, in my opinion. So we're talking about Sustainable Development Goals, by the way, or SDGs, and disaster resilient society. This disaster reduction is my coinage. In 1988, I said that from 1990, IDNDR, International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, was supposed to be started from 1990. So Japan enjoyed high economic growth. And disaster reduction or disaster prevention in Japan was perfect, I thought. In 1959, Ise-1 typhoon claimed the lives of more than 5,000 people, and Disaster Prevention Act was established after that. And after that, major disasters didn't happen until 1982 in Nagasaki flooding. claiming the lives of 299 people. That was the biggest at that time. So during the 1990s, Japan was proud of its capability to prevent disasters. So this decade, from 1990, was proposed by Japan and Morocco, approved by the UN unanimously, was started. But at that time, this reduction was translated as bosai or disaster prevention. And I said we should be saying disaster reduction as gensai, not a bosai, but people didn't hear my idea well. But now we talk about disaster reduction or gensai in Japanese. When a major earthquake happens, we cannot mitigate the damage 100%. So we are doing the impossibles. I was a professor at Kyoto University. In 1959, there was a typhoon, and that was a triggering event for us to create this institute. Science professors wanted to make zero damage after a disaster. That's why they said a disaster prevention. And we realized that it's impossible to prevent it. But the educational ministry didn't want to change the name. But they were able to change English names, not Japanese names. But that's why DRA was the term internationally used. So when we use the term SDGs or sustainability or sustainable, what does it mean? It needs to be practiced on a daily basis rather than when an earthquake occurs. This means that it's not about science, but a culture. People mistaken it. So even though we say we have to do many things, can we really do this science when a disaster occurs? For example, in Wakayama Prefecture, there is a town where every morning at a nursery school, there is a tsunami drill. What do? Well, when a teacher blow a whistle, the pupils will gather around the teacher and evacuate into the ground. They line up and evacuate. They do it on a daily basis. This is meaningless. Why? This is where Nankai Trough earthquake of the seismic intensity of 6+, meaning that the children will be inundated, will be killed by the tsunami. There's no time for them to gather around teacher. What should we do, really? That's the reality. You have no time. And if it's a seismic intensity of 6+, no one knows it. And if it continues around 3 minutes, it's a totally different thing than what you're doing in the drills. You have to understand this. Those drills are just useless unless you understand the reality. So drills have to be connected to the reality. With this earthquake on January 1st, actually, there are some clusters of earthquakes even prior to that. In Okumoto region, there are 5 earthquakes with the seismic intensity of 5. So old houses are getting weaker and weaker due to the earthquakes. So during this earthquake, people are dying twice as much as the Hanshi earthquake. And 230 people died out of 170,000 people. And housing collapsed 80% of the time. In Kumamoto, 220 people died related to the earthquake. 37 people died by the earthquake directly. 30 people died at the second earthquake because they didn't evacuate. And 69,000 people did evacuate. So if you don't evacuate, they stayed at home, and 30 people died as a result. So there are some reasons for those damages. If you try to eliminate those reasons or causes, researchers try to find out the reasons. They ask why. They come up with more than 10 reasons. Then what do? That's what's missing here. When there is a big disaster, what should we really do in reality? In case of disaster, you shouldn't do it for the first time. It needs to be something that we're practicing it every day. That's the idea. We are talking about sustainability. So when it happens, we're going to do this. But if it happens, it's not possible to do it, then it's not sustainable.
So today, after this panel discussion, I am to deliver the concluding message to you. And development is translated into kaihatsu. We are the developed country, so we should not development English word not as kaihatsu but as hatten. Or so for the developing countries, it is continue to evolve. But for the developed industrial countries, we have to think about the culture, not about the. So we have to build up our daily life. So when we do that on an everyday basis as part of the culture, that will be affected in case of the emergency. So we are the developed countries, so we have to understand this point. Without understanding, just to try to come up with the ad hoc measure is what we are trying to do at this moment. So there are many loopholes. So even in 2030, I think it will be difficult for us to achieve all these 17 goals. I think we already are missing many parts. So this is the reality. So we have to have the discussion, paying attention to the reality. Then, without that, the discussion leads us to nowhere, just an event. So DRA has been developed after the earthquake, and the DRA was established in Hatto, Kobe. And this DRA is to serve as a center for the international communication. So it is not only for the event. So these events are to enable us to establish the further capacity to deal with the disaster. So in that, I'd like you to attend this DRA forum with that in mind. Thank you very much. Now, please give big applause to Mr. Kawata. So now on. So SDGs, disaster resilient society, and Noto Peninsula earthquake. There are so many topics to talk about today, but I'd like to have the good understanding about them and enjoy this panel discussion today. So let me go back to Professor Sakamoto. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. You talked about the cases of Turkey or Hanshin Great earthquake, and you pointed out the possibility of collaboration in the future. So in your mind, what is the issues to come up with the measures against the large-scale disaster? Thank you very much. So far, Japan repeatedly experienced many large-scale disasters, but these experiences are not succeeded to the next opportunity. Of course, there are some parts which are succeeded to the next generation, but there are some which are not. And I think for people living in Kobe, the experience of the Great Hanshin earthquake is what has to be kept and succeeded. And I think, but not wholly succeeded to the next generation, that causes the kind of weakness in the measures against the next or coming disaster. And I think the third type of resilience, so to learn from the past and to make it into the future measure or transformative capacity is essential. So Professor Shou gave us the cases of Taiwan, in which the Taiwan learned experience from the past and come up with improvement of the system. Not only with the national government or local government, but also the private sectors played a role. And universities are involved in such activities was introduced. And that was very interesting. So not only the governments, but every sector has to be involved. And all these entities or players has to try to succeed the lesson from the past to the next generation. I think that is what is important now. And one of such activity I want to introduce you today is the 2018 torrential rain in Ehime Prefecture and NPO, local NPO, Wajima Grammar. And Wajima Grammar is a small organization consisted of the parents of that local region. And in case of that western torrential rain, they supported the evacuees at the evacuation centers by catering service. And after some time, the evacuation center was closed, but they found that big demand for the food service. And so after disaster, they opened the cafeteria for the children in the local areas. And they also found that the service is also necessary or important not only for children but for the other people such as aged people and others. So they shifted it to the local community cafeteria. So these Kodomo Shokudo or children cafeteria can be switched to the disaster prevention or evacuation hub in case of disaster. That's what we're trying to do right now through the collaboration of the local residents. And at present in Japan, there are about 7,000 such cafeteria for children. And this number is equivalent to that of the junior high school in Japan. So these cafeterias, which open on a daily basis, can be turned into the evacuation centers in case of emergency. That would be very useful. So in case of that emergency, the local residents cooperated to provide such food providing service. And we want to see more of such activities throughout the nation so that we can create the more resilient society. Thank you very much. So these hubs, which serves in different purpose in normal times, can be switched to the emergency response centers. And we have to make it sustainable. Thank you very much for your comment. So next is Professor Shou. So as was mentioned by Professor Sakamoto, you explained us the cases of Taiwan in which Taiwan learned from the past experiences and improved the system. And I found that Taiwan is very good at doing that. So do you have any additional comments, such as the difficulty you faced and what kind of advice you have for Japan? So the theme is that the challenge facing you face against the measures against the huge scale disaster. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So as I mentioned earlier, the case of Taiwan. Actually, in Taiwan, the issues we now face is how to mitigate the disaster. That is an issue. And Mr. Kawada mentioned that from the normal times, various drills are being carried out, and that have to be made into a culture. And in Taiwan, we do have these type of drills. And when it comes to disaster mitigation, how much we can do is very difficult to know. So we have to study and measure what we have been doing so far. And before the next disaster, we have to comprehend how much disaster mitigation capability we now have. If we can set it, and when we make effort in that direction, I think we can come up with a better measurement. And I think we can improve our capability of disaster prevention. And in Japan, actually, there are things I want to learn. One is about the setting of the target of the disaster reduction or mitigation. So the plan to strengthen the country or plan to strengthen the region, we sometimes have the KPIs to measure the results. And by checking the result with a KPI, how to come up with a specific measure. I think this is a point that Taiwan has much more room to do. And based on the nation strengthening plan, we will incorporate the town establishing or community establishing plan. So not only the disaster prevention, but also we have to involve the urban or town or community establishment plan, and also the social welfare. And by working in that way, I think we can expect the greater effect. So I think we have to study more about Taiwan's situation in the future. And we have to share the experience. So how we can, by having such international forum, we can get together and share the international experiences and lessons, and we can think about how we can bring these lessons back to our own country. And I think we have to establish a system for that, learning from each other. Thank you very much. So when we are in Japan, we take the Japan's disaster prevention system for granted, or sometimes we criticize it. But as was mentioned by Professor Shou, in the world, the countries which have the disaster prevention as a mainstream and have many plans and many projects is not so large in number. And I think that's a point we have to pay more attention to. And Professor Shou said that it is necessary to involve various players, especially the local residents, and also what the national government is doing have to be connected. And I think Taiwan is very good at that. So we would like to learn from each other and carry out these measures. So if the disaster hits Japan, that will have the impact on Taiwan and vice versa. So thank you very much. And this is a situation in Asia. So Ms. Kodama, you gave us various introductions. So the enhancement of capability of the individuals and the community hasn't progressed well in Asia. So even with some scientific evidences, it is not directly related to the reduction, mitigation, or reduction. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So listening to Professor Shou, I found that the experience of Japan was well incorporated into the measures in Taiwan. I was very much impressed with that. And at our facility, ADRC, we receive many trainees from the Asian countries or so-called study visit participants. And they learn about the disaster prevention in Japan. But to bring back what they learn in Japan to the policies in each country is sometimes very difficult, so we cannot find many of such cases. So Disaster Prevention Division does not have the big power in the national government organization. So under such a situation, to enable the Disaster Prevention Division to play a larger role and to have the impact on the national policies is what we have to achieve, but it is not the case at this moment. And each one of us has to have the awareness that the disaster prevention is very important, and we have to raise our voices to deliver the message that disaster prevention is very important, so that the national public, general public can have the awareness that it is very important. And in our activities, as I introduced earlier, we have to discuss how we can make the situation that leave no one behind. And we found that it is important to involve the younger people and come up with a suggestion. And that is what we have discussed. And by doing so, I think in the country, disaster prevention will be taken up as the big policy issue. That is a situation we have to create. Thank you very much. So it's a very huge issue. So even if we study, it is difficult to bring it back to the policy of the country of origin. But we have to decrease the number of the victims by the disaster. And I think you went through the various hardships to bring back the improvement. Now I'd like to give the microphone back to Mr. Endo So you have been carrying out various activities in Japan's disaster prevention. So based on experience, I think your role is to have the connection with the areas affected by the disaster. And I want to talk about the support you have been providing. So how do you connect it to the future disaster prevention activities in Japan so that we can learn a lot from what you have experienced? So, Mr. Endo, the microphone is yours.
Yes, thank you. Regarding support, in Chubu, middle of Japan, which Ishikawa Prefecture belongs to, is a central part to support Ishikawa Prefecture. In Kumamoto or Eastern Japan earthquakes, Kansai Wider Range Federation Alliance was the counterpart. So considering all that, from the national government, the Chubu block of mid-Japan was considered, but that was not enough. So that's why Kansai and Kanto areas are asked for help. So we have to talk to the prefectural government to understand the needs of the on-site disaster-stricken areas. We have to decide the counterparts and their prefectures so that they can be requested to help. As Mr. Kawada mentioned, this time from early on, the roads are damaged and transport was really hard. In the northern part, then self-defense force was mobilized so that at least minimum amount of support can be given quickly because roads are broken. So they walked on foot to provide supplies. But that's not everything. So that's why counterpart prefectures are giving quick support. We discussed in the morning, and on that night, we were determined to deliver things to Ishikawa Prefecture. But nationally speaking, there are a lot of issues and challenges in terms of the response and its quality speed. Maybe roles and responsibilities has to be decided more accurately. If you can talk about one more thing, Ms. Tamura, you were talking about SDGs, and you talked about integrating knowledge in relation to climate change. So can I mention something about that? There are three things, actually. One, a sense of crisis needs to be shared among people. Regarding climate crisis, as you know very well, CO2 accumulative amount from industrial revolution and the temperature rise is proportional. As you can see, the data from IPCC. So, if it's within 1.5 Celsius degrees, as mentioned by Paris Agreement, then there'll be more typhoons, there'll be more landslides, there'll be more droughts. It'll be highly risky for Japan, for humans. So it has to be within 1.5. If you try to do all of this, then there was 2.4 trillion tons of CO2 emitted so far. And we have only 400 billion tons to go in the future in order to go for 1.5 Celsius degrees. If you think about bathtub, it's about 60 centimeters tall, and you have only 10 centimeters left if you think about pouring water. It's like 300 tons of water poured every year. Compared to 30 years ago, China is multiplying by 4 or 5 times of CO2 now. But per capita, Japan is more than that of China. So that's a sense of crisis. We talk about carbon budget. It's like a boiled frog because it kills you slowly but steadily. You cannot go back. That's a point of no return. If it melts, it's not going to be frozen again. For example, you see the example in Greenland. So that's a sense of crisis we have to understand. Another one is we need to be autonomous. Here today, we talk about some of the isolated villages. They don't have food, medicine, or toilets. From disaster reduction perspective, we need to be autonomous. For example, what about solar power panel or a battery storage in Ishikawa Prefecture so that they can still live? They can use smartphones this way. Or a wooden biomass should be used to avoid using electricity to get warm air. we can also maintain forest better this way. If it's a devastated forest, you see a lot of bad trees, but there will be better trees, and that can also avoid droughts and landslides, mudslides as well. That means that we can better take care of disasters. Under the new building standard, we can withstand the seismic intensity of 6, so we need to have better woods for newer building standards. And this means that if local people purchase those better wood, that can also make the economy better. Number 3, it needs to be cross-functional. We talked about integration to disaster prevention, environment, and welfare. And the key to that is developing people. When we have drills and trainings, we also invite people from meteorological agency to learn about weather or climate. We also study about climate change. We have the adaptation actions by making higher embankments. And from welfare perspective, we also learn about welfare in relation to disaster reduction. So those are the areas we need to develop people for. Those are the 3 things I wanted to say. Thank you. Those are big points. Climate change can trigger disasters. If you mitigate that, you cannot eradicate disasters. We need to all understand that. But we need to also be autonomous and work cross-functionally. You talked about 3 points. So from environment and global warming perspective, you mentioned very important points. For Mr. Kawata, you have already shared many things, but what's your thought on this? Do you know that at 117, right after that, 5,500 people died. Out of that, 5,000 people were collapsed under old housings, and 500 people died due to fire. When the buildings are collapsed, you cannot leave the house, and the fire occurred, you couldn't escape, and people died. So with the house collapse, most of them died, unfortunately. 3.5 million people will be affected in case of seismic intensity of 6, and the 5,500 people died. And in case of Taiwan, it's out of 2.4 million people, it was still less number of people that were affected and died. When I went there, some of the old apartments and collective housings were comparable to Wajima City's building collapse. They were turned over, literally. So, building collapse is basically consistent between 117 and 921. In case of Taiwan, the damage was even lighter than that of Kobe. Last year, there was an earthquake in Turkey. In 1999, the Marmara earthquake also happened in the northern part of the country. There is a fault in the northern Anatolia, and on the west, there is Istanbul. There was an earthquake there. 19,000 people died. I went there 5 times as one of the heads of the investigation team. The building standards had to be changed, so American academia applied the latest building standards in Turkey after the earthquake. However, the building standards was disagreed by construction companies. If they pay money to governments, these building standards didn't have to be applied. That was a kind of loophole in this mitigation plan. So 50,000 people died because of those new collective housing that collapsed due to the lack of building standards. In Japan, we basically have space between buildings, but in Turkey, it's not the case. There is no streets between buildings. The buildings are kind of attached together. if they're the same building, they shake in the same way, but if the shapes or heights are different, they shake differently. So they have to collide with each other. And if it's weak, you turn over. So that's what happens, and that's what happened in Turkey. Although you have building standards, it's not really met, meaning 50,000 people who are killed due to the houses that are collapsed. So looking at 117, 921, and Turkey's earthquake tell us that building and housing collapse are the common factor for killing people. After 117, we tried to use the tax to reinforce the building standards and buildings. But there was one condition to that, which was that the whole house had to be subject to appraisal. You cannot renovate your house partly. And you have to include every part of your house for this reinforcement of houses. And all the furniture in your house has to be moved or relocated. As you know, people are aging in Japan. Old people alone wouldn't be able to do all of this relocation. In 2000, there was an earthquake in northern part of Osaka, and 61,000 houses were partly destroyed, 57,000 out of Osaka. Furniture broke, fell, hitting old people. They couldn't help themselves. Some volunteers were needed badly. Is it like young people putting those furnitures back? The roof tiles that had to be reorganized again, but it was not too heavy a work, but they still needed young people's work. When we worked with Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport, we said, even though it's just one room out of a house, can we still subsidize those rooms? And they said no. And I asked why. They said because we cannot distinguish between reforming or renewal of a house and a room. We cannot distinguish. But in case of wooden house, they're supported by wooden materials, and it can break and fall down when force is applied from the side. With Osaka and Kyoto University and Osaka Prefecture, we worked together to make wooden panels to mitigate this problem. So Osaka cannot really produce great wood. They're based on drought wood, but they can make 20 pieces of wood to make panels to actually reinforce against earthquakes. It's also demonstrated by Kyoto University's Disaster Reduction Institute. We got a patent, but it's not penetrated. Why? Every month, there is a patent fee of 300 yen or 500 yen every month, but it's not really penetrated. Why? Even though you get the patent fee goes to individuals. So NHK or newspaper knew that these panels are used, and it can be done with just 50,000 yen, including the installation. When we see the earthquake this month, at the New Year's Day, different generations meet and enjoyed each other, and the second floor just collapsed down to the first floor. So if one of those rooms escape being collapsed, we can also still apply those panels using wood. But the government says we cannot do this. 72 hours after disaster does not mean that you are still safe. I mean, when the buildings collapse, there are still spaces. If you happen to be in those spaces between buildings, you can survive. After 117, it was not the 72 hours. 80% of those victims instantly died. They didn't last a day. So rescue dogs came from all over the world, but they couldn't find anyone alive. All of them were dead when found. So wooden houses don't have spaces for people to escape. So if one of those rooms escape being collapsed, people can be saved. That's what we need, but it's not happening. And every year, the building standard application ratio is over 90%, but it's not due to the reinforcement. It's because of the old people that pass away in those old wooden buildings, and those houses had to be destroyed, and empty lands will have a new apartment, and it seems like the building standard application rate becomes better. That's how the numbers are pushed up now. So it's like if you live in old houses, the government is waiting for these people to die. I talked very fiercely with the Ministry of the Land and Infrastructure. I said, please change the policy, and it's not changed. It's not because of the absence of subsidy. In Kobe City, they have to pay millions of yen for reinforcement. But even while living in the current house, it's very difficult to make it reinforced. It's not only about money. Those policies do not reflect reality. I think that's the problem.
So when the Nankai earthquake takes place, what I'm worried about is there are places which will be affected by the big tsunami, may have the seismic level of 6 or harder earthquake. And through the experiment, we found that the things will topple down. So the area which will be hit by tsunami have the inside of the houses in chaos because of the earthquake. So people cannot evacuate from the house. So in case of the big disaster, we already know that the damage will be, human damage will be very severe, but no measure is taken. Rather than taking a measure, what we do is just to search for the things we have to do or negative points. So in case of the Noto Peninsula earthquake, in the past, the seismic intensity level 5 earthquakes hit the region repeatedly, and it is well known that these wooden houses in Noto Peninsula became weaker. And there came this intensity level 7 earthquake. And we know that it cannot be avoided that these wooden houses topple down completely or collapse completely, and then people will be killed. But the policies and measures are not taken in a way to protect these people, because disaster is not our daily life. No one expected such disaster takes place at this 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the New Year Day. And we never expected such accident takes place at Haneda Airport on the next day. So disaster emergency is not in our daily life, but we have to be serious about thinking about how to deal with these disasters. Just looking into the causes is not enough, but we are still looking into the causes. But what we have to think about is how to deal with the expected situation. And because we will have the grave situation caused by the expected Nankai Trough earthquake or others. But the policies haven't reacted to the reality, and the result is as we accordingly expect. So we have to take measures which are directly linked to the improvement of the situation. Thank you very much for your comment. So I'd like to have each one of you to comment on what is most important to achieve, to realize the disaster resilient society. And we have time until 4:20. So at the very end, Mr. Kawata has time to make the concluding remark. So now I'd like to ask the other 4 members on the stage to give us another word on their thoughts about the realization of disaster resilient society. And each one of you have about 90 seconds. So starting with Professor Sakamoto, I have 2 things. So first one is to center on the people and to provide the support for the people with various needs. So regardless of the nationality, as long as there's a registration with the government, the support can be delivered. But to try to meet the specific needs of the individual is the kind of area where we can expect a further improvement. And the second point is that the speed of the reconstruction. So with the aging of society, when there's a delay in the reconstruction, there is a depopulation issue. So the quick recovery is important. Thank you very much. So please give applause to Professor Sakamoto. Next is Professor Sho. So the keyword for the reconstruction, I think it is very important. So the preparation can change the situation caused after the disaster. So we can assume what kind of situation will take place after the disaster and make preparation for that beforehand. And then we can be calm and take the steps to deal with the situation caused by the disaster one after another. And the second point is that the sharing of the experiences. So in the connection of the international education, I think sharing of experience is important. So last year, with Professor Sakamoto, and we concluded the MOU for the exchange of the students of these two universities to study together and to focusing the disaster prevention. So two universities will focus the human resource development. So the preparedness and the sharing of experience. That was a comment by Professor Sho. Thank you very much. And next is Ms. Kodama. So Professor Sho now mentioned learning together. And there are many countries in Asia which haven't experienced large-scale disasters, but sometimes disaster hit these countries. And many, as I mentioned earlier, many people come to our center to learn about the cases of Japan. And sometimes the negative aspects were also taken up, but to the eyes of the other countries, there are some points, or there are many points that we can teach to the other countries. So we can teach each other and learn each other to create Asian countries which are strong against disaster. So Japan's disaster prevention and Asian disaster prevention and collaboration between the two is the area Ms. Kodama will continue to work from now. Now, lastly, Mr. Endo. I have 2 points. So first is that no one should be left behind. This is a theme for today's forum. So the local community disaster prevention has to be enhanced, especially together with the local firefighters. We have about 40,000 people, but their population is very much aging. But we now see the increasing number of female firefighters, and also we see some students are involved in these activities. So these local capacity against the disaster have to be enhanced, especially by the younger people and females. And another one is how to deal with the vulnerable people. So that is a support for the people in need. So the national law and regulations were devised. So these disabled people or aged people, these people in special need have to be supported locally. And sometimes it is difficult, especially in urban areas, because people do not know each other. So the welfare specialists have the communication with these vulnerable people on an everyday basis. So in planning the welfare, we have to think about or include the plan for the evacuation in case of a disaster, so that we can have the kind of system or systematic mechanism to deal with the evacuation or support for these people in need, so that we to establish a kind of relationship with the people in need. So to involve people in activities against disaster and how to provide support for the people in need. These are the 2 issues or challenges, you think. Thank you very much for your comment. So today we have a very commemorative moment together a few weeks after the Noto Peninsula earthquake. and have this forum here in Kobe, which was hit by the Great Hanshin earthquake. And this is a fruit of the great effort you have continued so far. And we'd like to keep this opportunity in mind to continue to work on the disaster reduction and disaster prevention. And everybody, please give a warm applause to all the members on the stage. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much from us to the audiences and also people who are watching this event online. And this concludes my panel discussion part. Thank you very much, Professor Tamura and all the panelists on the stage. Now, Professor Tamura and the panelists, please go back to your seat. Thank you very much. So lastly, we'd like to invite Mr. Yoshiaki Kawata, the chairperson of the Executive Committee of the International Disaster Reduction Affairs Forum, Alliance Forum, and Executive Director, Disaster Reduction and Human Renovation Institution, for the concluding remark. Thank you very much. So I have to deliver the concluding remark because of my position. So the speakers and panelists, thank you very much for your presentation and sharing of opinions. And I think all of you are very insightful. And to carry out or execute what we have discussed today is the most important point. One thing I'm proud of is I have been working in the research of disaster prevention for 50 years. I think no one has devoted so many time in this field. I wrote actually 1,100 theses. I'm a researcher and I'm not a practitioner and I am not a person from the government. I'm a researcher, so I have been focusing the disaster prevention as an area of research. And what I learned through my experience is that the continuation can provide you the power and the capability. So you have to continue to do the things. So as I mentioned earlier, disaster is an abnormal situation. So we cannot be well prepared against disaster but how we spend the daily life will be reflected in the situation after disaster. So when I go to Tokyo by Shinkansen Railway, I always buy a bento box and a bottle of water or tea at Shin Osaka Station because when the Shinkansen train operation is stopped because of a disaster, we really contain in the Shinkansen train 1 hour or 2 hours usually. Or whenever I visit some people, I use the bathroom beforehand. Especially in the case that disaster hit the region when I am in the elevator, there's a chance that we'll be closed in that case for hours and hours, or maybe a day, and that kind of situation can happen. So, if we can establish a kind of custom, a practice to be prepared against disaster in a daily life, that is very important because we never expected such disaster takes place on the day of the new year, but that is the nature of a disaster. So we are now at the Portobello Hotel, and all the members of my family know that where I am now, because even if that smartphone cannot be used, and when you don't know where your family member is, that is a big problem. And in case of the Osaka northern part, the earthquake, it occurs at 7 o'clock in the morning, and that has a great impact on the BCP. So no BCP has a manual about how to behave when a disaster happens in the course of commuting to the company. And I told the person that what you have to do is to return to your house. And he said that I have no family member in my house. But you have to think about the possibility of having fire from the next door house. So in case of emergency, what you have to do is to return to your house. And actually, in this case of the earthquake on the north part of Osaka, it is only the 60% of the employees of the NTT, the carrier operator, had the employees come to the office, and then the operation of the business cannot be continued. So even in such a situation, abnormal situation, we have to make effort. We will not lose our control. So nothing special is needed on the daily life, but we have to make the correct assumption about what is coming. I talked about the tsunami and what actually happens, and if that is quite different from what we expect in our exercise, the exercise is not at all useful. So what we do in a daily basis, part of a daily life as a culture, will be useful in the case of the emergency. So we have to utilize science for the disaster situation. So in Ishikawa Prefecture, earthquake quick news was not at all useful because that news is delivered based on the speed of the wave, and it is 8 kilometers per sec and 4 kilometers per sec. And using this difference of the speed of the waves, the alert is given. This is how the alert was designed, but when the epicenter is close to you, that kind of alert does not work. And without understanding that, you will wait for the alert against a disaster, an earthquake, but it is not useful. So in this way, sustainability consists of something you can do in your daily life or even in the emergency. So we have to be careful about this point. So it is not about the kind of huge project and execute a special project. So it's not a special event. So disaster causes damage and disaster kills people. And if you lose your life, that's the end of it. So other things can be reconstructed, but if you lose your life, that's the end of it. So you have to differentiate these two. And you have to come up with very strict measures against the disaster. And the United Nations has been advocating the SDGs and asking us to promote it. And I think it is only Japan which is serious about carrying out or achieving the SDGs. And other countries think that it is impossible to achieve all of these. So some of the other countries select some of these goals and trying to achieve them. It is only Japan who have the package of goals to achieve everything at one time. But there's evaluation that not everything can be done at the same time. But Japan is very serious, so trying to do everything at one time and cannot achieve anything. So this is the situation we have. So about the SDGs 15 goals and 160 targets, we have to select which one we'll work on. And that's how we go ahead toward 2030. So if we work on every one of the 169 targets and cannot achieve anything, in case of emergency, nothing will work for us. So in case of the disaster, it is not the halfway around. So in order to deal with the disaster, we have to have the complete measures against it. So when we try to achieve these goals of SDGs, what actually we're trying to do is the thing we have to think of. So when we just working on them does not bring the good results. So in this forum is held annually because this is not an event. So through this event, we have to keep our mindset and awareness about a disaster by holding this kind of event so that we can stimulate each other. And we have to repeat these events so that we can change our awareness. which is very important.
So this is a weekday holding this forum, and you're here with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Disaster reduction is not about number. It's about every one of us thinking what to do and how to act. We talk about inclusivity, diversity, and many other things. We need to include everyone, especially in urban areas. There are many people. When a disaster occurs, a tremendous damage could happen. If you live in the disaster-stricken areas, it was just 170,000 people in Ishikawa. And in 117, 3.5 million people lived in the disaster-hit areas. That's why the damage was heavier as well. As you know very well, how do we really embody and realize SDGs to mitigate the damage that may occur to you? It's our problem. It's a problem for each of us. And hopefully we can go even beyond 2030 and continue this activity. That's what it means to be sustainable, right? I mean, sustainable development is, in a sense, timeless. Creative reconstruction is timeless. It's not like you have to do it by when. Creative recovery means you have to do something new. Why? Because society is changing. When a disaster occurs, you make recovery plans, and if you meet that, you think it's end, but it's not the end. Because the society is changing in the meanwhile. So during the 117, the land in Nagata ward was reorganized. And if we tried to recover Nagata area, as in the plan, it was more difficult for people to live. So they had to rearrange the land planning. So even though you make a plan, the plan changes with the time. So disaster recovery and reconstruction is not only targeting people's livelihood, it's also about city development that continues timelessly to the future. That's what it means to be sustainable. I hope you understand what I mean. And our prefecture here has experienced Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and we must be the most resilient capable against disasters. And each one of you here should do our best. Hopefully 117 is a lesson for us to make the best use of. Starting from Hyogo Prefecture, I hope you can join us in the initiatives toward the future. Thank you. Mr. Kawata, thank you so much for your closing remark. So, this concludes today's International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2024. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you very much for coming today. When you leave the room, please make sure not to leave your belongings.